The sun dipped low over the quiet Texas ranch, turning the sky into shades of gold and orange. The soft wind carried the scent of hay and wildflowers. Horses moved lazily near the wooden fence, and the world felt peaceful, like time had slowed down. Samantha Reed had just moved from the city 2 months ago. After years of noise, traffic, and people rushing everywhere, she wanted quiet. Her heart needed peace. She had come to this small town to work at a local animal rescue shelter, far from her old life and its chaos. She wasn't used to country life, but she was learning, slowly. She often came to the open fields in the evening, watching the sunset while sitting on a wooden rail. It was her favorite moment of the day. One evening, as she was lost in thought, she heard footsteps on the gravel road behind her. She turned and saw a tall man walking toward her, hat in hand, boots kicking up dust. It was Luke Harrison, the cowboy everyone in town knew. He owned the neighboring ranch and was known for being quiet, kind, and hardworking. People said he could calm any wild horse and fix anything broken, whether it was a fence or a person's mood. "Evening, Miss Reed," he said, stopping a few steps away. His voice was deep but gentle, like the wind before a storm. Samantha smiled shyly. "Evening, Mr. Harrison?" "Luke," he corrected, smiling slightly. "Mr. Harrison makes me sound old." She laughed softly, the sound almost surprising her. It had been a long time since she'd laughed easily. "All right, Luke," he nodded toward the sky. "Beautiful sunset, isn't it? Always reminds me how quiet the world can be." "It's peaceful," she agreed. "I think that's why I came here." He leaned against the fence near her, keeping a respectful distance. "You're not from around here," he said, not as a question but as a simple truth. "No," she said, shaking her head. "I lived in Chicago most of my life. Everything there moves too fast. I needed to breathe again." Luke nodded. He didn't ask more, but she could tell he understood. The quiet between them was easy, not uncomfortable. For the next few weeks, Luke started showing up every few days. Sometimes he brought fresh eggs or vegetables from his ranch. Other times he helped fix the shelter's fence or carried heavy feed bags. He never asked for anything in return. Samantha tried to thank him with coffee or pie from the bakery, but he always said, "Just being neighborly." Still, something gentle began to form between them. She noticed the way he smiled when she talked about the animals, or how his eyes softened when she laughed. She liked his calmness, his honesty. There was no rush, no game, no pressure. One evening, after a long day at the shelter, Samantha was sitting by the corral, brushing a rescued horse. Luke arrived quietly, carrying 2 cups of lemonade. "You look tired," he said, handing her one. "Maybe a little," she said, smiling, "but it's a good kind of tired." They talked while the horses grazed nearby. The air was warm, the stars just beginning to show. Samantha felt a comfort she hadn't felt in years. After a pause, Luke looked at her, his eyes calm but searching. "You seem different tonight," he said softly. "Quieter than usual." She looked down at her hands, fidgeting slightly. "I guess I'm just thinking too much." "About what?" She hesitated. Then, after a moment, she said something she had never told anyone. "I've never been kissed." The words came out quietly, almost like a secret carried on the breeze. Luke blinked, surprised but not mocking. He just looked at her with genuine care. "Never?" he asked gently. She shook her head, a shy smile on her face. "No, I don't know why. I guess life was always busy and I never trusted anyone enough. Or maybe I was just scared." Luke nodded slowly, understanding. "Ain't nothing wrong with that," he said after a moment. "There's no clock running on these things." Samantha glanced up at him, her heart beating faster. "Most people think it's strange." "Well," he said, setting his hat down beside him, "most people don't know what's worth waiting for." There was silence between them again, but it was a soft silence, like a warm blanket around their shoulders. Luke didn't move closer. He didn't make her uncomfortable. He just smiled, his voice low and kind. "Let's start slow," he said. "No pressure." Something in his tone made her eyes sting. No one had ever said that to her before. No pressure. She felt seen, respected, safe. They sat there under the growing stars, talking about little things, her life in the city, his days on the ranch, the funny habits of the rescue dogs. Every word felt natural, every smile honest. The night grew cooler and she wrapped her arms around herself. Luke noticed and quietly took off his jacket, offering it to her. She hesitated, but he said, "Please, you'll catch a chill." She accepted, pulling it around her shoulders. It smelled faintly of hay and pine soap, simple, comforting scents. As she sat there beside him, Samantha realized she was smiling for no reason. Just being near him felt right. Luke stood after a while, putting his hat back on. "I should get going," he said. "Early morning tomorrow," she nodded, standing too. "Thank you for everything. The fence, the lemonade, the company." He tipped his hat slightly. "Anytime, Miss Reed," she smiled. "It's Samantha," he grinned. "All right, Samantha." He turned to leave, and for a moment she almost called him back. But she didn't. She just watched him walk down the dirt path, the moonlight stretching his shadow long across the ground. That night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't stop thinking about him. About his kindness, his patience, his words. Let's start slow, no pressure. The next few days felt different. She looked forward to evenings, half hoping he'd appear again. And when he did, it felt like the world became a little softer. They didn't talk about love or romance. They just shared time, fixing things at the shelter, feeding the animals, sometimes just sitting quietly together. But deep down, Samantha felt something new awakening inside her. It wasn't fear this time. It was warmth, trust, and a sense of something real. She had spent her life thinking that love was supposed to be fast and dramatic like in the movies. But here, under the wide Texas sky, she was learning that sometimes the best things start slow, and sometimes the right person doesn't rush you, they simply wait beside you, hat in hand, smiling until you're ready. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of small-town life wrapped Samantha in a comfort she hadn't felt before. Every morning she woke to birds singing outside her window, and every evening she found herself looking toward the horizon, wondering if Luke might show up again. He usually did. Sometimes he came by with a bucket of apples for the horses or a loaf of fresh bread his sister had baked. Sometimes he just stopped by to talk. Their conversations flowed easily, about simple things like the weather, the animals, or life on the ranch. But beneath those simple talks there was something steady, something growing quietly like roots under soft soil. One Saturday morning, Luke showed up earlier than usual. Samantha was at the shelter, sweeping the floor, when she heard his familiar footsteps on the porch. "Morning," he said, smiling as he leaned against the doorway. "Morning," she said, looking up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're early today. Had to drop off some supplies in town. Thought I'd check if you needed help here." She smiled, setting the broom aside. "You always seem to show up when I do." He chuckled softly. "Guess I got good timing." That day they worked side by side, cleaning, feeding, laughing at the mischief of a stubborn goat who kept escaping its pen. Luke didn't say much, but the way he looked at her sometimes made her heart flutter. It wasn't a bold stare, just a gentle glance that said he cared. When they finally finished, they sat outside under a tree, drinking cold lemonade. The sun was warm and the wind rustled through the leaves. For a long time, neither spoke. It was enough just to be there. Finally, Samantha broke the silence. "You ever think about leaving here?" she asked quietly. He looked out at the open fields. "I used to when I was younger. Thought maybe I'd travel, see the cities, the oceans. But then I realized everything I need is right here." "Everything?" she asked, smiling. He nodded. "The land, the quiet, the people I care about." He looked at her then, his eyes steady and kind. "And now maybe a little more." Her cheeks grew warm and she looked away, pretending to focus on a bird flying past. Inside, though, her heart felt lighter than it had in years. Over the next few weeks, their friendship deepened. Luke invited her to the town fair, where they rode the Ferris wheel and shared a plate of warm fried dough covered in sugar. They laughed like kids, and for the first time, Samantha forgot about all her worries. At one point, as they watched the fireworks light up the sky, Luke turned to her. "You've got a beautiful smile, you know that?" She blushed and looked down. "I don't smile that often." "Maybe you should," he said softly. "The world could use more of it." After that night, she realized she was falling for him. Not in the fast, dizzying way people talk about in movies, but in a quiet, steady way. Like she was finally learning what it meant to trust someone. One evening after a long day, Luke invited her to his ranch for dinner. He had cooked simple food, grilled chicken, potatoes, and salad. It wasn't fancy, but it was perfect. They ate on the porch, watching the sun sink below the hills. Samantha looked around the wide land stretching out before her. "It's beautiful here," she said. "It feels like the world stops for a while." Luke smiled. That's why I love it. You can hear yourself think, she nodded. I think. I was scared to hear myself for a long time. Maybe that's why I left the city. Too much noise there. He listened, his expression calm and understanding. Sometimes quiet helps us find what we've been missing. After dinner, they walked down to the corral where a few horses were grazing. The sky was dark blue, dotted with stars. Samantha leaned on the fence, watching the animals move slowly under the moonlight. Luke stood beside her, close but not too close. The air between them was soft, almost fragile. I used to think I wasn't made for this kind of life, she said quietly. Simple, calm. But now I don't know how I ever lived without it. Luke nodded, his eyes fixed on the stars. Peace has a way of sneaking up on you. She smiled, glancing at him. You always know what to say. He looked at her then, his eyes meeting hers. Not always, he said softly. But I mean it when I do. They stood there in silence for a long moment. The night air felt cool against her skin. Samantha's heart was beating fast, not from fear, but from something new, something gentle and real. She took a deep breath. Luke, she began, her voice almost a whisper. That night when I told you I'd never been kissed. I've been thinking about it. He didn't move, just listened. She smiled nervously. I still haven't, she admitted. But lately I've been wondering what it would feel like with someone I trust. Luke's expression softened. He took off his hat, holding it in his hands. His voice was quiet, careful. You sure about that? She nodded slowly. I think so. He stepped a little closer, close enough that she could see the kindness in his eyes. We can still go slow, he said. No pressure. Samantha smiled, her eyes glistening. I know. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The horses shifted quietly in the background. The crickets sang and the stars shimmered above. Then gently, like the wind brushing through leaves, he leaned closer. It wasn't rushed and it wasn't dramatic. It was soft, simple, and full of care, a moment that felt like it belonged to them alone. When they pulled back, Samantha looked down, her cheeks warm, a shy smile forming on her lips. Luke smiled too, his voice quiet. See? No pressure. She laughed softly, and tears filled her eyes, but they were happy ones. You're something else, Luke Harrison. Just a cowboy, he said, putting his hat back on. Trying to be decent. They sat together after that, not needing to speak. The silence between them was full, of peace, of understanding, of something that didn't need words. Days later, life continued its steady rhythm. Samantha kept working at the shelter, and Luke kept running his ranch. But everything felt different now. When he showed up at her door, she didn't just see a neighbor. She saw someone who had changed her life in the quietest way possible. Sometimes, she'd catch him watching her while she worked, and he'd smile, that same calm smile that had melted her fears the first time. Months passed, and their bond only grew stronger. There was no grand confession, no big moment. Just two people choosing each other every day, one simple act at a time. Samantha often thought back to that first evening when she told him her secret. How she had expected judgment or pity, but instead found patience and kindness. Now, whenever someone asked her what love felt like, she smiled and said, "It's quiet, steady, and kind. It doesn't rush you, it waits for you." And somewhere, on that peaceful Texas ranch under wide open skies, a cowboy still tipped his hat, still spoke softly, still reminded her that real love doesn't need to hurry. It just needs honesty, trust, and time.